G'day, May 40 here. I got 3 rules, mate, right? There me 3 rules for cracking a win. Rule 1, the world's a bloody shambles. Yeah? The world's a shambles. You gotta fight back. Fair crack of the whip. You gotta have a thick skin, mate. Attack, attack, attack. So, if some bloody drongo comes at you with a shiv, right, you belt him back with a bloody big bazooka, yeah? So, rule 2. What's the truth? What's the truth? You know what's the truth? What you reckon is the truth, what I reckon is the truth, what he reckons is the truth. What's the truth in life, eh? Deny the lot, admit bugger all. You know what's dinky die? What I say is dinky die. And third, most important, no matter how stuffed you are, mate, you never, ever, ever chuck in the towel. You always claim you won. Always, mate. Always. So, trying to understand these crazy times that we're in, right, I find that Carl Schmitt is the most helpful. And he published a book in the 1920s, Political Theology, 4 chapters on the concept of sovereignty. And he says the exception is more interesting than the rule. We're in a state of exception right now. Right? The rule proves nothing. The exception proves everything. In the exception, the power of real life breaks through the crust of a mechanism that has become torpid by repetition. So we're in a state of exception. Donald Trump is breaking all the rules. He's making Ronald Reagan just look like a wuss. And who is the sovereign? According to Carl Schmitt, sovereign is he who decides on the state of exception. So Donald Trump is governing like we are in an emergency. And this comes right after the government took away so many of our rights during COVID by invoking a state of emergency. We've got this once-in-a-century influenza called COVID. So now Trump and Elon are implicitly stating that America is in a state of emergency. And so someone has to grab the rudder to save the ship. Who better to grab the rudder to save the ship than the chief executive of the United States? So I was listening to a constitutional law expert yesterday, Steve Vladeck. He's, of course, a liberal. And he said Trump's first executive order banning immigrants from 7 majority Muslim countries, right? The first version of that was struck down by the Supreme Court. Second version of that was struck down by the Supreme Court. But the third version passed muster. But the third version likely would not have passed muster if they had not already ruled out Trump's first 2 executive orders on this. So it's similar to playing a very aggressive defense and daring the refs to call a penalty on every play. And that's kind of what Donald Trump is doing, flooding the zone, daring the refs, the courts, to call a penalty on every play. So I don't think America has ever seen anything like this second Trump administration. Donald Trump is talking about taking over Canada, taking over Greenland, taking over the Panama Canal, taking over Gaza. Right? I don't know how to think about this state of exception except with Carl Schmitt. So I turned to a friend, a philosopher friend, and he said, Carl Schmitt focused on discretionary power, but he also venerated the state and its use of power. Donald Trump seems to be pushing the limits of state power, but he seems intent on constraining the officials of the state, the bureaucrats who had been using and abusing it. What people usually mean by mentioning Carl Schmitt in academia over the past 40 years is the friend-enemy distinction. Right? This is used by people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and other virtue signalers on the left. So when you turn any political dispute into a moral dispute, you're defining the other as an enemy in the Carl Schmittian sense. So the real influence of Carl Schmitt has been underground, primarily on the left, mostly via the Frankfurt School and then through feminism, the notion that everything is political. So Herbert Marcuse made liberal notions of tolerance, what is political, what is repressive, and then the same kind of inversion occurs all the time with feminism, where equality becomes a male concept, and if it's not defined in a way that liberates women in relation to men, then it's just not real equality. So you could argue right now we're in an emergency about the budget deficit. If the courts are consistent at all that Barack Obama was allowed to fail to enforce immigration law via prosecutorial discretion, justified by budget considerations, that would seem to be sufficient precedent. President Joe Biden unilaterally decided not to enforce immigration law for over the first 3 years of his administration. Chief Justice John Roberts will find a way to protect the status quo because he is a status quo guy. And my friend says, I'm telling people to look at Clinton Rossiter, who thought through all this stuff in American terms. So his book, American Presidency, shows just how weak the countervailing powers are to the president. Carl Schmitt's book, Dictatorship, worth a read too. It's long, but nice history. And my academic friend says, 40, you are on the right track. Turning to the Substack, what international relations theory tells us about Canada becoming the 51st state. This is Glenn at the United States of Exception. He's got a PhD in political science, international relations. His subhead is, why it's more likely than you might think. And so in a press conference before the inauguration last month, Donald Trump was asked if he's serious about annexing Canada, Greenland, and the Panama Canal, doing it through military force. Says he's open to invading Greenland and Panama, but he prefers economic force to take over Canada. Now, according to the website Manifold, right, there's a 6% chance of the United States taking over Canada by January 2029. I mean, that is a much bigger chance than I expected. Right? You know, people are taking bets on the United States taking over Canada. And you're saying, 40, what does academic international relations literature have to tell us about Trump annexing Canada? And the short answer is not much. Right? Scholars have barely grappled with how and why some nation states just cease to survive. So it's really left up to the lowly bloggers and vloggers to push the field forward. So we know that states located between powerful and enduring rivals, such as Poland between Germany and Russia, or Mongolia between China and the Soviet Union, they don't have it so good. So since 1816, about 40% of violent state deaths have been buffer states, and about 40% of buffer states have died. So Canada's sort of between the United States and China, the United States and Russia. So in any given year, a buffer has been 3 times as likely to die and 2.5 times as likely to die violently as a non-buffer state, regardless of the capabilities or allies that it has or how nationalistic its population. So this buffer state theory of state death supports the explanation for the war in Ukraine, offered by people like John Mearsheimer. Ukraine is a buffer between Russia and NATO. Putin feared if he didn't annex much of Ukraine, Ukraine would become dominated by NATO, and then it would be used as a springboard to threaten Russia. Since Putin couldn't know with certainty that NATO's intentions were benign, because we never know other people's intentions, he felt he had to invade Ukraine to ensure Russia's security.
In a snow globe. Dana Perino, the 5. The Democrats getting their panties in a twist at the first ever House DOJ subcommittee hearing. Lawmakers are still fuming over Trump and Elon Musk's efforts to rein in sex changes for Guatemalans and limestone paperwork mines for retirees. Weird.
He was using his propaganda machine to do it when he said that we sent millions of dollars to Gaza for condoms. That
Trump
was a lie.
Musk.
We do not work for an unelected billionaire like apparently this guy does.
In the last Congress, Chairwoman Green literally showed a pic in our oversight congressional hearing. So I thought I'd bring one as well. This, of course, we know is President Elon Musk. We know that he is leading a power grab also abided by and encouraged by Donald Trump.
They want to look into your kids' lunch money. It's about helping Elon Musk and Donald Trump be as efficient as possible in robbing our government.
But it could have been a lot worse. At least they didn't burst into song.
Which side are you on? We'll fight against Doge. We'll fight Elon Musk. No Elon's kept within our walls. We'll fight from dawn to dusk.
Which side are you on? The losing side. But the Obama pod bros are taking a different approach, lamenting how Doge beat them to the punch.
I've seen the messaging memos, and it's like, you know, the young people, Gen Z, they like Doge and what Elon's doing. We all know that government is slow. We all know that government can be inefficient. We all know that the bureaucracy can be bloated. We all worked in the White House. We tried to reorganize the government. We tried to find efficiency. It's hard to do.
And honestly, some of this is pretty annoying because it's some of the stuff we should have done.
Right, yeah.
Like,
yeah.
you know, you could do some of this.
They're working through the stages of grief. And happening just moments ago, President Trump defending Musk from the constant attacks from the left.
But I want to commend Elon because he's done he doesn't need this. You know, he's abused by you people every day. He's found more things than anybody could find. I think he's got the credibility to do it. I know he does.
You know, Jesse, the Gutfeld theory of public singing, you know you've run out of ideas if you feel compelled to burst into song.
When you're singing, you're losing.
Yes.
The Democrats look like Code Pink with better clothes. Greg, they are losing the information war. And it's easy because there's no victims they're pointing to. Where are the children going hungry? Where are the veterans that can't get aid at the VA? There's none. The victim is the taxpayer. Obama did try to figure this out, but he failed. We have a retirement paperwork cave where like hundreds of people are working for the government and writing things out in longhand. He tried to computerize it for $100 million, failed, so hired more people to work in the cave. It's the stupidest thing I've ever seen in my life. Musk is working for Trump. Trump hired the world's richest man. Right. That's a flex. That's what you call a power move. And he's working for free. It's like good cop, bad cop. Musk is going out there and firing people and cutting spending, and Trump's just at the Super Bowl and bringing hostages home. That's okay. And he's only going to do this for about a year and a half. I think there's the deadline. Yeah. It's kind of like this show. Greg Gutfeld is like Musk. He's the bad cop. He whines, he complains, he kind of makes moves and gets things done for the rest of us. Well, I sit back and look good. That's what's going on right now.
Wow. Yeah, that's not bad. Yeah. You know, Dana, this cave thing is insane. Do you know a lot of, okay, how come we didn't know about this?
We did. No, and actually many reporters have reported on over the years. In 2014, there was a big piece in the Washington Post, and then Selena Zito did it. And it's just like, what's going on here? So that's why the Pod Save America guys are like, yeah, we know about these things, and they were ineffective in getting anything done because you bump up against the bureaucratic wall. You have other priorities. You're like, fine, do the retirement underground, whatever. But when you have somebody like Elon Musk working for free and they've got all the young people saying that we can fix this in 10 minutes, they're like, let's go ahead and do it. When the Dems were singing today, I thought about the judge. Because, not because she sings,
Me too.
but the Democrats can't prosecute their case. And if this was in front of her courtroom, I feel like you would say, in my chambers, and say, get it together, using your book title, and say, you guys are making fools of yourselves, and I'm trying to help you here. And if not, I'm going to call a mistrial, and you're out.
Okay, who is the most masculine Democrat right now? All right, good question here from Trey.
Who is the most masculine Democrat right now in America? Mayor Pete.
Is that a gay joke?
No. Mayor Pete. No. Well, no, it's just that he's not particularly masculine. Nobody's like, oh, Mayor Pete, he's a badass. Chuck Schumer. Is anybody like, hey, you know, Chuck Schumer holding up an avocado and a beer to talk about the Super Bowl? Is anybody like that trying to grill? Is anybody like, hey, that's a dude I want to hang out with?
But Trump's like a grandpa.
Well, hold on.
Yeah.
Trump took a bullet in his ear and immediately stood up and said, fight, fight, fight. Every man in America.
My God, who is that woman who's showing a ton of flesh right there? I have transcended earthly desires. I'm asking for a friend. Who is this woman at Empowering a Nation, Inspiring Thoughts, Institute of Politics, Divided We Stand? Like, my friend wants to know who that woman is.
And most of the women out here were impressed by that, even if the women won't admit it. She's shaking her head strong.
Okay, Pete Hegseth. Got a clip here.
States does not believe that NATO membership for Ukraine is a realistic outcome of a negotiated settlement. Instead, any security guarantee must be backed by capable European and non-European troops. If these troops are deployed as peacekeepers to Ukraine at any point, they should be deployed as part of a non-NATO mission, and they should not be covered under Article 5. There also must be robust international oversight of the line of contact. To be clear, as part of any security guarantee, there will not be U.S. troops deployed to Ukraine.
Okay, that sounds good. Grandpa hardly sleeps.
Yeah, he's a whole different animal. Like, I mean, during the end of the campaign, when I watched a 78-year-old man do 2 all-nighters in a row, and then like I'm dying. You know, we're on the plane coming back, and he puts on music, and he's doing like Trump DJ night. I'm like, I just want to go to bed. Like, what is going on? And I go home to shower before I start my day, and I'm looking, and like the guy after 2 all-nighters goes right on like national television, like morning shows, like where it matters. It's like. It's next level. He's a hard worker.
He's a hard worker. It's crazy for like what he does and his age. I think it's crazy.
And Lindy Lee here on Glenn Beck.
President was. Who was the president in the last 4 years?
Glenn, the thing is, there were like 10 of them. Because you have like Steve Ricchetti and Mike Donnellan and Nita Dunn and Barack Obama orbiting around and all these people who were unelected senior advisors running the show. It certainly wasn't Joe Biden. He was just a figurehead signing the executive orders and not really understanding what he was signing. And it's just a very, very grave situation that I tried to flag for everybody for a number of years now. It took me a while to get here, though. You know, they will excoriate you, and I'm still paying the price. Glenn, it's been really hard time for me. I haven't slept. I didn't sleep last night. I've been having trouble sleeping. I'm being attacked from both the left and the right, by the way. Somebody on the right is trying to defame me, and the left is just insane. So it's not easy, Glenn.
I know that. I mean, the president was.
So she said on one interview that she stopped menstruating because of all the stress. Right, back to United States of Exception Substack. The United States, both before Donald Trump was elected and since, has long acted as the world's preeminent revisionist power. So Trump seems hell-bent on revising not only the international distribution of power and resources, but all of the core elements of the international order that have kept the great powers from fighting each other directly since World War II. Right? Since 1945, the peace is being kept by the United States, and the United States imposing a global system, right? It's being sustained by the United States, restraining itself to avoid provoking allies and adversaries into military upgrades. So we've got unprecedented commercial globalization. We've got all these norms of territorial integrity. I don't know about you, but when I go out with women, there's nothing more exciting to me than a woman with territorial integrity. And mutually assured destruction, all right, that sounds like a lot of my relationships. Some of those crazy bipolar alcoholics, a lot of fun initially, but then they started to feel like a millstone around my neck. So Trump promises to undermine every one of these pillars. Right, and you cannot remain preponderant by estranging your allies while antagonizing your enemies. You cannot maintain globalization by weaponizing the international trade and financial system. You cannot uphold international norms by trampling them with impunity. You cannot preserve the balance of terror and pursue nationwide missile defense at the same time. So here's the case for Trump annexing Canada. Trump wants to annex Canada, so he's going to try to annex Canada. Right? What stops the United States from annexing Canada? It's not that the United States is not powerful enough. Right? If the United States wanted to, right, it could simply take Canada. Right? Canadians would sign over control just to avoid being turned into Fallujah. And it's not that the United States doesn't think that annexing Canada would be strategically valuable. Right? The Biden administration's 2022 national security strategy, Biden's 2025 Arctic strategy, the Pentagon's 2024 Arctic strategy, the intelligence community's 2024 annual threat assessment all discuss the Arctic as a key site of great power competition between the United States, Canada, and Russia. So the primary reason the United States does not annex Canada right now is that it believes it's important to uphold the post-1945 international norm against conquest, which says it's impermissible for states to occupy or annex another state's territory with impunity. But it doesn't seem like this international norm is a strong value with Donald Trump, right? So since winning the election, Donald Trump has posted about seizing control of Greenland 15 times, the Panama Canal 18 times, adding Canada as the 51st state 10 times. In his inaugural address, he fixated on taking the Panama Canal. He declared the United States would again become a country that expands our territory. He suggests the United States intends to take over and own the Gaza Strip. Nor do Trump and his allies appear to believe that deterring predation by other actors is a good reason for the United States to uphold the norm against conquest. Right. To the contrary, Trump says he believes acquiring Greenland and the Panama Canal is necessary for protecting the free world from China and Russia. Secretary of State Marco Rubio testified during his confirmation hearing he believes the international order is not just obsolete, it is a weapon being used against the United States by rogue states, by great power competitors to undermine American interests. So this all bodes poorly for the prospects of international peace and security under Trump and beyond. Even if he doesn't annex Canada, just Trump's rhetoric about doing away with Canadian sovereignty threatens to undermine the international order and the domestic and international support that's needed for the United States to uphold territorial integrity norms. So the U.S. public's support for sanction against norm violators is highly vulnerable to accusations of hypocrisy. Right, 67% of Americans support sanctions against Russia when told that Russia interfered in a democratic election or violated the rights of refugees. But only 54% support sanctions after showing a mock statement by a Russian spokesman pointing to similar U.S. election interference or mistreatment of migrants. So the Taiwanese are warily watching the Trump administration's moves towards Greenland, Panama, and Canada. And as Mark Halperin reported, he's getting increasing signals that Trump is reaching a deal with China where they get Taiwan, we get Greenland, Canada, Panama Canal. So Trump definitely harbors revisionist aims toward the Western Hemisphere, and he's going to continue to entertain them, and he's going to risk opening up a Pandora's box of international disorder.
A blob that is responsible for so many ills. Trump then kind of hammered on the judges are getting in the way. I think they wanted to continue to put the shiny red balls out there of examples of common sense says, oh my God, this has to be stopped. And why hasn't it been stopped? And like, thank you for everything you're doing. And then lastly, I think it was just this idea of like, we are transparent, we are accountable, right? Taking the weakness and trying to make it a strength. Personally, I thought they made the case worse for themselves, but I bet
for all the hype, and we talked about this yesterday.
Right.
He said, I'll accept the ruling of the court. Yeah, sure.
Well,
so
hold on. He did. But the two of them sat there and talked about like judges are should stay out of this, that Congress, he talked about them as if they don't exist, as if we, the executive branch, me, Musk, and Trump can find stuff, stop the spending, like Congress appropriates.
Wait, hold on. There's a difference. I get there's two issues here that I think are important. One is the process itself that you're talking about, and then the common sense aspect of it. The idea, what he said yesterday is that we are the elected, Donald Trump and then me as his designee are the representative heads of the executive branch. And when a judge says you can't look at the books of the executive branch, that undermines democracy.
Hold on a second. It's not, but Sean, one of the reasons that I think he really has no concept of we have civil liberties, right? We have privacy protections. The U.S. government is not a startup. And there's a reason government has those protections. Historically, there have been abuses in this country for not good reasons.
This should be outrageous to everybody. This is not Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal. It's just stupid. And the idea that we're bringing back common sense is what we should all be cheering for. And the idea that you have a press corps that walks in there and says, Elon, are you wearing a hat? And what does X say? And I mean, it's like, guys, you are so out of touch with what's going on. Like I said, I was just, my heart could not have warmed.
Reporters care rightly about scrutinizing these proposals, about the impact of them, etc. What they don't feel is the excitement over the grassroots excitement over it, or trying to explain it so that people can understand what it is that Musk sees.
So notice how Republicans, conservatives, Trump supporters consistently are describing his agenda as common sense. So just as Americans resonate to the word freedom, and Christians resonate to the word love, and Jews resonate to the words justice and law, right? And people on the left and Democrats, right, they resonate with expertise. So constant invocations of common sense. And sometimes common sense is the best tool to use, and sometimes expertise is the best tool to use.
Right? You know that. Now you save money and it can really snowball, but you got to have the outlays. And so if Musk were to say, because I agree with you guys, it's total common sense. If he says, this is the system, and for X amount of money we're going to request, it's going to accelerate this, make it much more efficient, much better, etc. Great. Instead, it's the shiny red ball, and then I'm not sure they want anyone following up on this. Right? You know that. Now you save money and it can really snowball, but you got to have the outlays. And so if Musk were to say, because I agree with you guys, it's total common sense. If he says, this is the system, and for all of you guys, I agree with the people who have come on, some of this stuff is common sense.
Common sense, that's the word that Republicans love. Dennis Prager says, if it doesn't abide by my common sense, then I'm simply not going to accept any study that is not down with common sense. Okay, so there's a retired political scientist, Charles Lipson, says Trump and Musk are turning the Democrats' weapons against them. So with Democrats in disarray and unable to choose a positive theme, they have settled on the obvious alternative, right? Unite around shared hatreds. And at the top of the list is Elon Musk and his Doge project, Doge standing for Department of Government Efficiency. Nobody elected Elon Musk. He is more powerful than the president. Time magazine tried to drive home that point by depicting Musk behind the resolute desk in the Oval Office. So attacking Elon Musk follows Saul Alinsky's strategy. Personalize the attack to mobilize your coalition. Right? The attacks on Musk are frequently untrue, but they do follow a shrewd piece of political advice given by the old leftist organizer Saul Alinsky. Personalize your grievances. Let one person stand for much bigger complaints. It's easier to mobilize around that one person, that concrete target, and then move on to bigger goals by taking him down. Trump's response is Elon Musk works for me. So Republicans recognize the risk here. They have responded by pointing out that Elon Musk answers directly to President Trump. There are no middlemen. There are no bureaucratic protections. Trump can fire Musk as soon as he becomes a political liability. And that is what Democrats hope to make him. So this back and forth is part of a broader attack on Trump's swift, aggressive action against entrenched Washington power centers. Rolling them back and asserting control is at the heart of Trump's MAGA agenda. Trump can only move so boldly because he wields the strong presidential powers forged by Democrats. Right? Trump's strong presidential actions illuminate the long arc of America's changing governance, engineered by Democratic politicians and progressive intelligentsia. So Democrats created all the tools that Trump is using to attack official Washington. Democrats hope to centralize power in the presidency to break through the old limitations of the 1787 Constitution, and they largely succeeded after decades of effort. What the authors of this transformation never expected was a president who would use the great powers they handed him to dismantle their own cherished projects. That is exactly what Trump is doing. So the Democrats are in an awkward position. This political jiu-jitsu puts Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, and their friends in an awkward position. They grab the bullhorn to scream, no one elected Musk. They're right. But then no one elected bureaucrats, the bureaucrats they are defending, either. And they are far more insulated from control by elected officials. So will the Democrats' counter-assault succeed? We won't know till they take their case to the voters and to the courts. The courts will decide which Trump actions are permissible, which need congressional authorization, and which violate the Constitution. But we already know the Democrats' resistance so far is politically unpopular and filled with self-contradiction. So the progressive agenda was captured by the phrase living constitution. It was first articulated by Professor Woodrow Wilson before he became president, and Herbert Crowley. So it began in practice in 1937 when the Supreme Court buckled to Franklin Roosevelt's pressure and ruled his new agencies and their regulatory actions were constitutional. Until then, the High Court ruled the other way. After that, the largest steps were taken by Lyndon Johnson, whose Great Society program created Washington's complex array of bureaucracy. Barack Obama put the capstone in place with his health care legislation. So people like Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Lyndon Baines Johnson, Barack Obama were architects of the modern progressive administrative state. So modern American governance is centralized in D.C. in the executive branch. And these cumulative efforts have shifted power away from the states and within Washington from Congress to the president and a proliferating array of executive branch agencies so that the president can govern by executive orders and regulatory actions by these agencies. Congress still passes laws, but its principal role has been reduced to overseeing these agencies poorly and approving engorged consolidated budgets. Now the trajectory has changed. That change is the core of the fight in Washington. So a more conservative Supreme Court has begun setting more stringent limits on bureaucratic discretion, eliminating deference to agency decisions, and requiring congressional authorization for major rules. Donald Trump is acting along parallel lines. Together, these actions by the High Court and a populist president are altering the long arc of a government that is increasingly centralized, intrusive, and bureaucratic. Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition. So now the Grand Inquisitor has arrived in the form of Donald Trump, wielding the very tools that the Democrats gave him.
Which it's okay for them to say the courts are illegitimate. It's just not okay for people, on the other side to say that. I say everyone's allowed to say whatever they want. You're allowed to say that's part of what it means to have a political and ideological argument in the United States. Right. They're allowed to say Trump is Hitler.
Agrees with you, John. I think, and then this is why I brought up the 70% number, because there's a 70% said, yeah, he campaigned on this. We expected him to do this. He campaigned on this, then he won an election fair and square, and now he's doing it. And 53% approve of what he's doing. There's a gap between those who think what he's doing is legitimate and those who approve of the actual policies. The 70% is a legitimacy vote. That is an overwhelming majority who say, yeah, what he's doing is legit. I don't necessarily like it, but that's what he needs. And that's what's stifling the Democrats, is not just that a lot of the policies, some of the policies are popular. I mean, we saw the returns on the polls on, mass deportation and some of the things that he ran on. But the general perception among the public is that he said, if you elect me, I'm going to do this. Then he won an election fair and square. Now he's doing it, and the legitimacy argument is completely evading the Democrats in a way it didn't last time.
Right. I just one more comment about constitutional crisis, since I wasn't on the show yesterday. Constitutional crisis is the new protect our democracy. And we went through 4 years of Biden and the Democrats saying that Trump was a threat to democracy. We have to protect democracy. And then when we got the exit poll in the 2024 election and we saw who did better on the issue of democracy, it was Trump. So I just caution the left to not go over their skis here with constitutional crisis. Before you know it, people are going to start saying, well, Trump is protecting the Constitution, or maybe they're going to focus on what these district court judges. I mean, there was a big issue with nationwide injunctions from district court judges in the first Trump term, and then Biden had to face it during his term. If anyone had a little bit of dispassion or detachment here, they would recognize that a judge in New York, a district court judge in New York, in the middle of the night in an ex parte decision, which means he didn't even hear the government's argument, to say that no, the only people with access to the Treasury system should be the permanent bureaucrats who no one has elected. That's insane. That's a total overextension and abuse of the judicial power.
Look, I'm glad you said that they're getting out over their skis, because this is what I mean when I say everybody should be able to say whatever it is they want to say. That's the world in which we have gotten to the point where the idea is you shouldn't say that is a legitimate way to conduct a political argument. Is one that we just lived through to our incredible detriment. let people say that Trump is Hitler. I'll give you an example, because Trump is gifted with his enemies. His enemies, he drives people so crazy that he drives them to destroy themselves. That's why, Matt, your caution is right to them. Like, keep your powder dry. Don't go crazy.
So one of my favorite essays, an essay that most influenced me over the past few years, is on constitutional dictatorship by a couple of Yale law professors. And they noted that the framers of the American Constitution believed that democracies were dangerous. They believed that democracies would lead to tyranny, to the denial of liberty that people now routinely associate with dictatorship, right? There is no inherent reason why democracies will not deny liberty. We saw that happen during COVID. So for the framers of our Constitution, democracy was not the antithesis of dictatorship, neither as a logical nor as an empirical matter. Democracy was a force that always had to be checked and its passions cooled, and every republic known to the framers, many of whom were steeped in ancient history, had eventually broken down and led to government by dictators such as Julius Caesar. Right? The lessons of the past available to the framers of our Constitution seem to be that the natural progression of popular governments was always towards demagoguery and tyranny. Right? And the most obvious example was the ill-fated English Revolution in 1640 and the rise of Oliver Cromwell as a dictator, known as the Lord Protector. So dictatorship is not worthy of either praise or dread, but it is worthy of ambivalence, right? It is an institutional framework for emergency government that is sometimes valuable and necessary for constitutional republics, for democracies, but it will always contain some dangerous tendencies that, if developing unchecked, right, will pose serious threats to democratic government. So emergency powers are absolutely necessary for effective governance in a nation state. Now, precisely because of the growth of emergency powers and the growth of executive discretion in American legal institutions, not to mention the unhappy fate of many other republics, right, we don't know what's going to happen with our haphazard expansion of executive discretion and emergency powers for the executive. Americans do not possess some special immunity from the pathologies that have befallen many other countries. So emergency government is sometimes necessary. And probably the leading American scholar on this is Clinton Rossiter, who died around 1980 by suicide. So he published in 1948 a book, Constitutional Dictatorship, which surveyed the growth of emergency power in America and other Western democracies. Now, constitutional dictatorship has a future in the United States is hardly a matter for discussion, right? Obviously it does. Rossiter wrote in the aftermath of World War II, at the beginning of the national security state, we now have 60 years of additional evidence to assess his conclusions. We've had an explosion of national intelligence services. We have our government's response to 9/11 terror and the 2008 economic crisis. So we now have gone through COVID. We have all sorts of examples of how systems of emergency governance work in the United States. Right? Most of life does not operate along democratic principles. So it's worth getting to know what the heck is constitutional dictatorship. Seems like a contradiction in terms, seems paradoxical, seems to combine absolutism, meaning a government devoid of restraints, with constitutionalism. Right? The words seem antithetical, but no democracy can survive without the opportunity for emergency government by essentially a dictatorship. So Clinton Rossiter wrote a brilliant book, Constitutional Dictatorship, Crisis Government in the Modern Democracies. He studied the responses of France, Great Britain, Germany, and the United States, and ancient Rome to emergencies, real and perceived, including those generated by the Great Depression and World War II. So some of these emergencies were national security, and you can understand the entire English political system, the politics of the United Kingdom, that their unitary structure, right, developed this way so that England could always be prepared at the drop of a hat to go to war with France. And so the United States has been blessed by these two giant moats, the Atlantic Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, and we're not exactly threatened by Canada and Mexico. But if you live next to a threat, such as England and all the states in Europe do, then you're much more likely to develop a unitary top-down system so that you can easily go to war. So one constant in all examples of emergency government dictatorship, in all emergency government, is the decision to adopt a form of dictatorship, whether it's legally valid or otherwise, right? The U.S. Constitution is not a death warrant. Japan has a constitution. It's not a death warrant. Right? If the Japanese need to violate their constitution to survive in some life or death struggle with China, I would hope that they would violate their constitution. So there are constitutional dictatorships and there are unconstitutional dictatorships. Now, Clinton Rossiter's work hasn't generated much of a legacy, but he's probably the best thinker on this topic. So probably the most important theorist of constitutional dictatorship in the West was the Florentine theorist Niccolo Machiavelli. He's best known for The Prince, but his work on Republican theory is more important here. These are his discourses on Levy, where he praised the Romans for constructing a constitutional structure for dictatorship before these procedures degenerated and were supplanted by Julius Caesar, the last of the initially constitutional dictators.
You've got 4 years of this fighting. If you go to Hitler in 2 weeks, if you go to the Reichstag fire and it's 1932 and I don't know who Hindenburg is in this scenario, because Trump is Hindenburg and Hitler, apparently, both combined. If you go to this, where are you going in April? Where are you going when there actually might be a moment at which Trump is really tempted to defy the will of the Supreme Court or something? You've already said he did it already, so... And then, you have stuff like this amazing thing that appeared in The American Prospect by Robert Kuttner, February 10th, 2025. What Trump could learn from Hitler on NIH funding. Subhead, even the Fuhrer knew to support German science and not just for war. Why is Trump trying to destroy America's great research universities? Now, Robert Kuttner is famously known, co-founder of The American Prospect, and unfortunately for people at Brandeis University, a professor at Brandeis University, was known during his days as a columnist for the LA Times as Crazy Bob. So, I mean, Crazy Bob is apparently resurfaced in this. But what I'm saying is, good. Congratulations, Donald Trump. Your enemies are helping you. They don't even know that they're helping you, and we know they should.
So hold on, I'm still trying. I'm sorry, you got me distracted by Bob Kuttner here. Yeah. You're saying that what he thinks that Trump shouldn't cut the NIH because Hitler was for government-funded research. That's his argument.
Yeah, Mengele. That was he was very supportive of twin experimentation programs.
Wow.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, this is why. The left has spent the last 10 or 15 years on campuses, in elites, all of that, working to silence the opinions of people with whom they disagree rather than engaging. And they're losing the power of engagement that I have to say, never had the opportunity to escape because of the monoculture that we are not really a part of and that we try to fight, and they are at 6s and 7s. I mean, the Atlantic sound this
like
is a good
point.
Lunatics. Can Trump hire a guy to go look at the books at USAID? Of course he can. Is it bad that the guy is like one of the most brilliant businessmen the world has ever seen? Yeah, it's terrible. That's awful. What a terrible, what we really need is some professor at Brandeis who thinks that Hitler had a real good idea there with the German, universities.
Well, but that's all connected because Elon Musk, because he owns Twitter and because he participates in the discourse on Twitter every 30 seconds or so. What you have here, the combination is you have like a bully pulpit, unseen. Yeah. I don't know when because.
Okay, back to this article by 2 Yale law professors on constitutional dictatorship. So if we assume the American president has the power to initiate war, to commandeer funds and resources for war, conduct war anytime, for any reason, in any manner he pleases, which is not true, he would be a constitutional dictator with respect to war and all matters related to war, because he would combine the right to assess the need for military action with the power to carry it out, and with the sole right to judge whether what he did was lawful. Now, he would not be a dictator with respect to a wide range of other matters, including environmental protection. So, to the extent that the president may create rules in a certain area, apply them, and execute them on his own without the ability of anyone else in the system to check him, he is a law unto himself. So if there is no difference at the end of the day between the director of the Federal Emergency Management Authority, FEMA, commandeering resources to deal with an out-of-control forest fire, and Joseph Stalin purging kulaks and collectivizing agriculture, right? So no system of government, no matter how well prepared in advance, can do without discretion. This is particularly true of the modern administrative state, which has always been in tension with traditional rule of law notions. So with respect to the thousands of minute individual decisions by bureaucrats and government employees, ranging from the allocation of resources in a public hospital to a police officer's decision to stop and inconvenience a motorist, official discretion is effectively unreviewable. So what constitutes a constitutional system is that it reins in this discretion in various ways without ever fully eliminating it. So when a police officer stops you, he has many of the powers of the dictator. The rhetoric of emergency is the standard justification for dictatorship, but dictatorial powers do not have to be connected to any real emergency. And even if a dictatorship is initially justified by an emergency, it will often continue after the emergency is over, so dictatorial powers can quickly become normal. So executive officials, noting the ability of emergency to focus the public's attention, and therefore they get to root around the unusual impediments to reform, they often find themselves in quest of ever new emergencies to justify the continuation of their authority. So this leads to a policy of government through emergency, normalizing dictatorial powers. Dictatorial powers may be granted because of the fear of an emergency, even if the emergency has not materialized. So global warming, it is an emergency. We have to give government the power to regulate, otherwise life on planet Earth will come to an end. So we have all sorts of incentives to magnify the probability and the danger of possible scenarios. And once the government declares an emergency and bestows dictatorial powers on itself, right, the government will often create a self-fulfilling prophecy. So the executive judges the situation is an emergency, deserving of emergency dictatorial powers, makes rules that frame the situation as an emergency, and then acts on that framing, thereby confirming the situation is an emergency. We've got a global warming emergency, guys. So the government has the power to enact all sorts of regulations because we're in an emergency. Never let an emergency go to waste. That was Barack Obama's Chief of Staff, Rahm Emanuel. So successful dictatorship constructs reality according to its own needs, and it helps society believe that the dictatorship must stave off threats and harms, both internal and external. So I've been watching Lioness, and there are some CIA operators who have carte blanche, at least in this TV series, to act against all enemies of the United States, foreign and domestic. Trump announced that he will be abandoning our European allies to deal with Russia. How can we be sure he won't dump Israel too? I know you're staying awake at night, worrying, will Trump dump Israel? I don't think he will, because he's had a long history of being pro-Israel. Also, he gets a lot of money from Sheldon Adelson's widow, who's a rabid Zionist. All right, from Grok. One of the most famous quotes by Karl von Clausewitz regarding the relationship between war and politics is, "War is merely the continuation of policy by other means." This is from his seminal work on war. He says, "Warfare is not an independent act. It is an instrument of policy used when diplomacy and other methods fail to achieve political objectives. So if you want to understand war, you need to understand its political context and aims.
But yesterday, Musk is in the Oval Office taking questions, you know, and then he'll go on Twitter and he'll be
just an observation about that, though. Taking questions in the Oval Office, I think it was very important that Musk was standing and Trump was at the desk.
Yeah,
because I think for someone who thinks in images like President Trump, he wanted the image of him at the president's desk and Musk having to stand with the other aides, even though he has such a megaphone and such an important role, it seems.
With his son on his shoulder.
I'm not sure President Trump wanted the son in the Oval Office.
Right, and
I've seen some pictures of him where his look on his face was not.
Stephen Miller, who, as I said, was standing over Musk's shoulder, did not look happy. And the thing about Musk is, you know, this is very much a work in progress, and it's very instructive to me, Musk's role on Twitter right now and what he's doing.
So John Podhoretz is not a big fan of how Musk conducts himself on Twitter. I'm not a big fan either. Kept notes. COVID-19 was used as an excuse to paper over many problems. They spent like crazy, and many pension crises magically disappeared. Was Musk using his son as a human shield? Yeah, I think he was. So, second part of this essay, the American presidency as a constitutional dictatorship. Essentially, the American president has all the foreign policy powers of King George III. So in the years following 9/11, the public attention was focused on issues of national security, but we have events like fears of swine flu, the economic collapse of 2008. So emergencies can take a variety of forms, both foreign and domestic. The primary chaos that pervaded Germany during the 1920s was economic. Most of the more than 250 presidential suspensions of rights under the notorious Article 48 of the Weimar Constitution concerned economic matters. First decade of the 21st century has made us all aware of the various dangers that can plague our social order. The cost of terror attacks may pale in comparison to the damage wrought by tsunamis, hurricanes, earthquakes, and viruses. 2009, the president of Mexico, Felipe Calderon, placed the entire country under a state of emergency because of the potential swine flu pandemic. All right, the president of Mexico concentrated political power in his hands. He authorized his health secretary to inspect and seize any person or possession, to set up checkpoints, to enter any building or any house, ignore procurement rules, break up public gatherings, close down entertainment values, and in every county in California, there's a public health officer has all of these powers as well. The decree states that this situation will continue for as long as the emergency lasts. The action violates the Mexican Constitution. So even when combating a grave threat to society, the president is constitutionally required to get congressional approval for any suspension of basic rights. Latin America has a long history of using states of emergency as a ploy to return to authoritarian rule. Now, the text of our Constitution is silent on how to deal with most forms of emergency. The Talmud and the Bible are silent on how to deal with modern forms of emergency. So the American legal system has proceeded through constitutional construction. All right, we've seen the implementation of the Constitution's vague clauses and abstract principles and its silences through the creation and application of precedents, both judicial and non-judicial, congressional enactments, administrative regulations, the building of institutions with their own rules and practices. And the most important place that we find the elements of constitutional dictatorship in the United States is in the modern presidency. All right, the Constitution says the president is vested with the executive power of the United States. He is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, and it is he who shall take care that the laws are faithfully executed. So the modern president is far more powerful, has far more resources at his disposal than the framers could possibly have imagined. The president is commander-in-chief of a standing army of over 1 million people. He has forces stationed all over the world, armed with weapons that no one in the 18th century could have envisioned. The United States is a global power. Its government has taken on global responsibilities, and the president has gained ever greater power and discretion. Both the administrative and regulatory state and the national security state offer numerous opportunities for decisive action, whether it be bailing out financial institutions, announcing bank holidays, imposing quarantine, seizing contraband merchandise, intercepting communications, engaging in covert operations, bombing overseas targets, moving American troops into harm's way, listening to all our phone calls, reading all our email. And so we've had this expansion of presidential authority through the creation of frameworks, statutes by Congress that delegate vast authority to the president to build a national security and domestic bureaucracy, and then empowers members of those bureaucracies to make decisions and regulations.
Oh, boy, do you have bigger fish to fry. You know, I don't really know why, you know, what, but he can't, it's too fun for him, which of course is the great secret of social media that people never talk about. Oh, it's so bad. It's this and that. It's fun. That's the crisis of social media, is that it's a form of very easily accessed fun that can, you know, sort of take over your brain. And so, and it's interesting because J.D. Vance, aforementioned, in Europe, made this very interesting speech about AI, in which he took made a welcome ideological shift in broad measure, as far as I'm concerned, but maybe in exactly the wrong direction, which is, he said, we are not going to, not only are we not going to quash AI with regulations the way Europe is, we are going to be the world leaders in AI. This is going to be a revolutionary, transformative industrial economic engine for our time. We need to be sure that the Chinese don't run things, and the way Europe is doing this is terrible. We need innovation. We need transformation. We need to lead. If only he believed this about other aspects of the economy, instead of becoming a postulant of and an expositor of this American compass. I can't remember the terms they use here, but the idea that the social good means that you should interfere in the workings of the free market to direct the economy toward more moral goals. And apparently AI is the one major force that he is willing to be somewhat libertarian about. Abe, how do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, I have a whole slew of misgivings about AI that I mentioned in my daily newsletter yesterday. But I actually think he's right, because
which you should subscribe to, which you can and should subscribe to at commentary.org.
Can should subscribe. Yes, thank you. But I think he's right, because it's here and we have to come out ahead. Namely, we have to beat the Chinese here.
Right.
My misgivings about AI would be exemplified by a Chinese AI monolith. If they came out ahead of everything. So, yeah.
Look, I agree with you there. I just think it's an interesting irony that that this untested technology that raises all these moral qualms and dilemmas, and also raises all kinds of questions about future employment in the tens of millions, things that can be replaced by this machine. Which, and if they can be, then they need to be, because they will be one way or the other if the technology is there. And it just means if we do it slow, Europe is. The point of his speech is that Europe may be consigning itself to a century of, sort of Japanese sclerosis, with its inability to move quickly, which is what happened with Japan's industrial policy, its top-down economy in the 90s, as everybody else got much more fleet-footed and was able to transition to free markets and moving people around and having a more dynamic economic system. It's just that it's interesting to hear it come out of his mouth.
United States president can easily become a constitutional dictator, and he is. Oh, I will be right back. Hang on.
That states that it was Joe's fault that Kamala didn't go on his podcast. Joe basically came out and put the lie to that. The Harris campaign wanted to blame him for it not working out.
Why? Why do they want to?
Because they realized it was the biggest fuck up to not do the podcast. She should have been on your show. She should have been on Joe's podcast. She should have been everywhere instead of building $100,000 fake set for Call Her Daddy.
Yeah. We invited her. We were talking to her people, and it could only be an hour. Then we had to discuss the topics first, and it just got to the point where I was like, look, why don't you just give me the outline and I'll do that interview, because I don't care what you give me. I'll make it work. And then you know what I think it was? I think it was the Brett Baer interview, which honestly, to be honest with you, I didn't even think it was that bad. I mean, there was a couple parts, but I thought she handled it okay. And but after that, it was dead silence. We had Newsweek put something out. We had the Washington Post put something out, and it just turned into crickets. But
I don't understand why it's so hard for her to answer simple questions. I don't understand why she has to do these endless word salads. Like, why is it so hard for you to be human? Just answer the question. You don't have to talk in endless circles. I just don't get it. And I know her. Like, when I talk to her, she's fine. But when she does these interviews, she becomes like a android. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, Sean, you're talking to me like a real full-blooded person. Why can't she just be that? You know, we don't want to rehearse. We don't want to caricature as president. We want a human being that we can relate to.
why do you think she can't? Do you think she's intimidated? Do you think?
There are several explanations. Some people say that she's just not that intelligent. It could be. Maybe she can't think on her feet.
That's
Maybe
what
she
I
relies on, talking points. But I have friends on her staff who tell me that she would get pissed at them for her own lack of preparation. Like, she would yell and she would get frustrated at them for her own inability to read the talking points and to internalize them. It's just, I don't know.
So we do need to move on because our time is short, but I'm trying to understand how it is that with this emphasis on the border, the numbers of crossings quadrupled under the first 3 years of the Biden-Harris administration. How did that happen?
There are a variety of factors that relate to what we have seen globally and what we are not immune from at our own border in terms of what we have seen in terms of surge of immigration and irregular migration. And there are solutions at hand, but we've got to have leaders who are solution-oriented, which we've been and are, and I am going forward, instead of leaders who want to make it a problem they can run on.
She definitely didn't seem quick on her feet, but I would still love to interview her. And I'm glad Joe, was able to set the record straight.
Yeah, and I'm here. I will give you as many names as you need in order to make the interview happen. Because I know her staff, and she will see the request. It's just a matter of her willingness, because she's so afraid to fuck up.
Yeah. What's she doing now?
She's deciding whether to run for governor in 2026 or try again for 2028. And I had someone, I kid you not, call me at 3:30 a.m. this morning.
Run for governor in California?
Yeah. Oh, she didn't call me, but I have a mega donor. She's a co-founder of Two-Factor Authorization. She called me at 3:30 a.m. this morning saying the Democratic Party is in shambles. Yes, we already knew that, but coming from the horse's mouth, it was very important. And she was saying how nobody, there's not a single person of importance in the Democratic Party thinks that Kamala Harris should run again. But Kamala.
Okay, Jim Garrity had an interesting column in National Review today. He says, everybody loves a convert to their cause. It's no surprise that many people on the right are warmly welcoming and embracing former Democratic National Committee fundraiser Lindy Lee, who has turned against her former party with a vengeance. It's a free country. Everybody's free to change their minds. But a lot of what Lindy Lee is saying now about what she saw, heard, and experienced among Democrats during the Biden presidency does not align with what she said at the time. In fact, some cases it is contradictory. Well, that makes sense when you're part of a strongly identifying in-group, as she was with the Biden administration and leading Democrats. Then you're going to pull your punches. And then when you finally become disillusioned, right, then you might come across as quite annoyed, which I think is what's going on with her right now. So Jim Garrity writes in National Review that many conservatives observed that Joe Biden appeared doddering and confused, was highly dependent upon his staff, and Lindy Lee's assessment aligns with these impressions of the Bidens. But this is not the impression you would get from Lindy Lee's public appearances or social media feed during the last presidential campaign. Yeah, when she was fighting for the Democrats, she pulled her punches. So from her public comments, Lindy Lee appeared to be an enthusiastic supporter of President Biden and utterly convinced he deserved a second term. In May 2024, she described meeting the president and how her heart burst. June 27, she posted, I was with President Biden a few minutes after the debate. Here we are at his watch party. He was amazing and kind as he always is, remembering tiny details about me and my family. I don't care what the pundits say about this great man. I will always be Team Biden. So if you feel like the First Lady is treating the president like a first grader, why are you telling everyone how great the president's memory is? July 19, she appeared on Sky News declaring, if you look at his legislative record, President Biden has been phenomenal. She posted on X, Biden is the most successful president of my lifetime. His legislative record is unparalleled. He's a fundamentally good and decent man. And on the day that Biden announced he would not seek another term, Lindy Lee posted, "He has changed my life in countless ways. He has guided our country out of one of the darkest chapters. I'm so proud of him. He's one of the greatest presidents in our nation's history. Supporting him was the honor of my life." And she kept on in this vein. July 24. "I have nothing but immense love and respect for this honorable, kind, wise, compassionate, fundamentally good man." She described how she cried when Biden's campaign sent her a thank you gift before he dropped out. So in 6 months, Lindy Lee's gone from calling Biden amazing. Okay, I'll be right back.
Harris is in her cloud of delusion. She still might run again in 2028 for president. So right now, the choice is whether to run for California governor in 2026 or president in 2028. And let me tell you something that the press doesn't know about. In order to run for governor in 2026, she would have to betray one of her closest friends, because the current lieutenant governor is a woman named Eleni. She has a long Greek last name. Please don't make me say it. But she's the current lieutenant governor of California under Gavin Newsom. She is running for governor now. She's a current front runner. She's very close with Kamala. In fact, her cousin, Kristen Bertolina Faust, was Kamala Harris's finance chair. So for Kamala Harris to run for governor, she would have to stab her friend in the back. And I know this is important because it's a question of integrity versus ambition. Is she going to put her friend first, or she's going to put her ambition first? And if I were to, I know Kamala, and I would say that she would probably put her ambition first. Friendship is collateral damage for her.
Man, well, she'd probably be a shoo-in out in California.
I don't know. I think, honestly, after the fires, I think the fires were a game changer and showed even Democrats that the entire party is just a party of fuck. Like, even liberals understand that now. There's been a complete mood shift across Hollywood. And I have donors across Hollywood, across finance. They are fed up.
Wow. All right. Well, let's move in. We've got a couple things to cover first. So I have a Patreon account. There are top supporters.
Okay, I am going to